Hello and welcome to Absolutely Not. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Kay Maltau Thomas Stroh. My pronouns are they, them, and you can learn more about me on my website, www.kstroll.com. Real quick, if you appreciate the work that I do here or elsewhere, please visit my Ko-fi page where you can join the Warm and Boundary community, leave a tip, or buy one of my workbooks on boundaries and psychological safety. Support my work so I can continue to do this work. The keywords for this episode are nonconformity, binary thinking, and conditional empowerment. I encourage y'all to look up the definitions of these words and compare them to the definitions that you carry with you on a daily basis. If you need help comparing, please let me know. Today's episode is titled, I Do Not Want a Seat at Your Table. Yeah, suck it in, suck it in, suck it in. We'll be discussing this today with the amazing sahibzada Mayed, any pronouns. Mayed is a design researcher and creative strategist. They bring a critically informed approach to community-centered design that seeks to advance culturally thriving and sustainably empowering outcomes. Inside and out, Mayed is an abolitionist, yes, at heart. They seek to articulate the ways in which, carceral logics and discourses are produced in our lives and dream of the ways in which we can liberate ourselves and reclaim the freedom to define our own realities. Whoa. They are South Asian, MENA, disabled, queer, neurodivergent, gender nonconforming, and a first-gen U.S. immigrant. Maya, thank you so much for being here today. Are you from? Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the intros. Excited to dive in.
I love how informative that bio was. Everything that you're doing, although you're very much centered on design, is around abolishing things that are forcing people to conform and also forcing people to want that seat at a table. Maya, why don't you want a seat at the table?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of what I've come to realize is oftentimes people talk about inclusion from the perspective of coming into a space and then conforming to the dominant narrative and the rules that exist within that space. So when I say like I don't want to seat at the table, that to me is an expression of nonconformity and recognizing that a lot of the times there's conditions attached, there's strings that are being puppeteered from people on how you behave within that space, how you show up, who you can be, and how you express yourself. So for me, like that's taken me years to come to realize where it's like, I don't want a seat at the table. That statement is more like a reclamation of agency for me and like being able to define who I am in the ways that I want to.
Okay, I think this is my past self whose heart is breaking right now. Because current me, I don't give a fuck about the table either. But my past self is just like, but wait, they tell us all the time, like you like act a certain way, get your foot in the door, then you'll be able to be your full self. Maya, have you ever been able to get your foot in the door and then be your full self?
That's a really great question. I think I feel like I've never actually, there are times when I felt like I'm being empowered by the space that I'm in the same sense as you mentioned, like being able to get your foot in the door. But what it's really been is like, as long as I'm operating and engaging on the terms of the people who are setting those rules and expectations, everything's fine. And the moment you non-conform, essentially, that's when you start to see problems appearing. And what I've personally faced a lot of the times is like the moment you point out something, that's when people are like, you are the one creating problems. So that's when the finger pointing, the blaming starts. And every time you speak up, essentially, there's a hyper visibility associated with that. And yeah, so I think I don't feel like I've actually truly been able to express myself fully, whatever that means, in a space like that I'm trying to get my foot in the door, like I want a seat at the table there, and the expectation underlying is that you're going to conform. And there's no space actually for people to express themselves openly however they want.
I don't know why this is aching me so much. I don't know why this is, because I know this. I know this to be true, that that statement alone, like, yeah, if you get your foot in the door, then when you get there, then you'll be able to like let your hair down and like be your full self. That is a lie. It is a lie that somebody made up in order to make us believe like we're capable of doing the same steps that a cis white man is able to do. We're just not. Like we're not going to be able to do the same route as they are. And when you were describing the rules that are set in place, I mean, we talking about a table, and I'm a visual learner. I thought about somebody setting up a dinner table and them having like salad forks and like tiny spoons and like shit, and me showing up and be like, why? Like, what's the tiny spoon for? And everybody just being like, how you don't know what a tiny spoon is or something like that. And I think about how that scenario could go differently. Like you could have asked me like, hey, do you know what a salad fork is? Or like all the guests, like what utensils are you used to using? When was the last time, I guess, Maya, that somebody asked you about like your preferences around the table? Or has anyone asked you about your preferences around the table? Like, hey, do you use salad forks? Or do you use, I think they have sherbet spoons? Neither here nor there, but has anyone ever asked you about the table before inviting you, or like, oh yeah, you can come to the table?
Yeah, I really love that analogy too. I'm also a very visual person, so I'm also questioning like, do I even use utensils at times? And I don't. So like, I do tend to eat with my hands too. So I think that there is like a very clear way of sort of explaining, like, yes, like, does anyone even stop to question and reflect on, like, is this even something that you do in the first place? And quite honestly, I don't feel like I've had a space like that I haven't had to co-create myself, where I felt comfortable enough, or someone's actually asked all of those preferences. And one thing I will say is like, I have been a part of like certain affinity spaces, but what I've found is they can be very unidimensional and just like they target one part of your identity and the other parts get erased out. And I think that's also really harmful overall, because it's just like you internalize the message that like this part of myself is okay in the space, but all of the others I can't actually express.
And I'm excited for everyone who is now becoming aware of how multi-layered humanity is. Like there's no way that I'd be able to just sit in one affinity group or one ERG or one, and they expect you to, like, if you're black, please don't join like the LGBT, like please don't do that. And also if you're black and someone, like please don't also go to, try to choose one and just like be a very loud voice there, which would be really fucking hard for me to do and has been really hard for me to do. You pointed out how even when you are in those groups, hypervisibility is like the number one priority, I guess, of the people who are claiming to want the input that you're going to give from those groups, or that you're going to give as the person that got your foot in the door. So you're just always that person like, oh, what do you think of this? Have you ever had to cope with that? Or do you have any like coping skills? I'm dealing with that hypervisibility.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because I feel like there's a lot of spaces where it's like, oh, you're the only like openly gender fluid person, or like, I think for me it's always been like a paradox because it's like you're hyper visible and then you're also being rendered invisible at the same time. So I think that's like a very layered um complexity there where it's just like, how are you hyper visible and visible at the same time, where people don't respect your preferences and don't respect your agency and autonomy. But then at the same time, every time someone's like, "Oh, like I know a queer person or I know a non-binary person," you happen to be that person. So I feel like for me personally, I've struggled with that a lot because claiming part of my identity being queer and being Muslim has been the hardest thing to reckon with because it's just like most people around me were like, that's just impossible. Like, you can't be both. And internally, I was like, well, I am. So, what do I do there? So, it's like every time I walk into spaces like that, it's just like either you're hyper visible or I feel like I can't bring those parts of bring myself in that way and show up, then it's like the invisibility that takes over.
And I am so sorry that you've had to be that person. And I mean, it resonates for me because I've had to do it several times. But I think about the autonomy that you're talking about, like how much being a token or being the only one takes away autonomy. Like you don't even get the chance to decide to be invisible. Like I would like to be invisible today. But if I'm not hyper visible, then who the fuck else, like who else is gonna be hyper visible? I think about that a lot on social media, specifically LinkedIn, which is trash, by the way. It's trash. Um, on how I'm like, I gotta keep posting content. Like I have to keep because or else then the white void wins. Like how have you, I guess, made sure to take care of yourself against the white void?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think one thing that I've been really pushing myself, and this is an imperfect practice, obviously, is just like investigating. So for to your point, like for example, if I'm like writing something on LinkedIn, I really try to make sure that I'm writing for myself and I'm writing from a place of power. So I think that and sometimes it's just like not always the case because sometimes it's just like you see something fucked up happening, you like are like, I want to speak up about this, and then you feel compelled to say something about it. And then that's the driving motivation factor. But most of the times I'm really trying to be intentional about like, I want to write for myself because this is something that I enjoy doing. It's personal to me, it's reflective. And then trying to come from that place, from like a very strong sense of embodiment and trying to stay in tune with like how I'm feeling throughout the process. But to your point, like with social media in general, you end up losing yourself along the way a lot of the times. And I feel like that's a constant like reckoning for me where it's like I feel like it's just is a cycle, right? It goes up and down all the time. And then there's certain days where I feel like I just don't want to say anything. And there's other days where I'm like, I have so much to say. How do I say it all? And just feeling that pressure too at times.
I love how in a lot of your answers, you're literally like your answers are just like and just acknowledging it. Like that's all I'd be doing is acknowledging that these processes are fucked, acknowledging that the table was not set by me or anybody like me, acknowledging that they're going to expect me to conform should I take space at this table. Like at some point, I'm going to have to give up myself. Where did you learn that just acknowledging is helpful, like at least to you in your journey?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of like personal reflection there that's obviously taken years and years, but I think the main thing for me was I grew up in a culture and a society where we were taught not to say anything, even though however wrong even though like no matter how like you felt about it, you were just taught to be out of touch with your body and your emotions. And it was just like that's not even a thing. So for me, the most powerful thing has actually just been naming things. And a lot of people have actually even told me that, where it's like you have a gift when it comes to peeling back layers and being able to name certain processes and how they operate. And I think I I didn't personally realize that until other people told me that that's really what you do well, where it's like naming things can be really powerful. And what I tend to focus a lot on in my work too now is just like giving people the language, because I think that's been the most powerful reclamation for me, is having the language to be able to say, this was not okay, or this is what's actually going on here, and not like internalizing it, not gaslighting myself into being like, oh, you're being irrational, you're being illogical, or you're being paranoid, and just like all of those internalized feelings. I think being able to reclaim those where necessary, and just to your point, naming things has been very instrumental for me.
Um, this is a real quick thought. Your hair looks bomb, girl, by the way. I forgot to say that. But the out of touch with your body, even that is not something we learn at an early age, is a sign of like abuse or someone who does not prioritize your safety. If somebody wants you to like disassociate from your emotions, or wants you to like be very passive and dismissive about the emotions that arise when you're around them, then that's a sign that that person is not prioritizing your safety. And I think, even like you said, like the very simple ability to name harm is something that you're going to be, why am I about to cry? Is something that you're going to be able to beautifully share with other people through that language and through that like vocabulary of just like, hey, just be in touch with your body, just be in touch with your emotions, and don't allow anyone to disconnect you from that. I love that so much for you and for the people that you're going to touch. Your work, specifically in design research, what have you found, I guess, in those processes and policies to be, I guess, distracting from the table, or maybe like that pushed you away from the table more so?
Yes. I think the thing that I've come to realize the most is, again, even in those situations, like a lot of people, and this is true for a lot of marginalized groups, is like they're taught to suppress what's coming up. So we're forced into these situations that don't necessarily align, and it's just like sometimes we have those unsettling, complicated feelings, but we're taught not to, because everything's just with this illusion of objectivity and neutrality, especially to your point in design research, where it's just like, oh, like I was just tasked to do this research, and like I'm going to remove my bias completely. So in that situation, actually, it's like you're told not to bring yourself at the table at all. You're just like mechanized in this way where you're like, oh, you're just doing objective work, and you don't have to insert yourself or quote unquote your biases into it. But for me, the most powerful thing was being able to say, like, actually, I'm going to bring my full self to this work, because that is what nourishes and enriches it, and really leads to change transformatively. So I think that's been the most important thing for me in those spaces is, I'll say this again, like being able to recognize when there's resonance, recognize when there's synergy, and then how I feel within those spaces. And if something doesn't feel right, then being able to interrogate that, sit with that, and then see how you might respond.
I focus on definitions and vocabulary here a lot. On absolutely not, because it does empower people. It empowers people with knowledge and like the words they're going to be able to use to name harm. The word bias is kind of like, for a lot of people, is emotionally activating. They're like, oh, that's bad, like don't do it here. But what biases are actually like beliefs and like experiences and everything you've had throughout your entire life. You're just bringing it with you to whatever you're doing. If your biases are harmful, then of course you're going to cause harm. But if your biases and experiences are not harmful and they're based in like and once again, back to your like intentionality, like what are your biases based in? Like what are your experiences? If we never talk about your biases, how the fuck are we going to confront them? Like when are we going to bring them to a conversation? So I love that you're talking about how in a lot of spaces it's just like how you talked about you're not allowed to be your full self. You're not allowed to bring those to the conversation. And when we don't ever bring it to the conversation, then we're never going to get to the root of the harm, or like who's causing the most harm, or how I've been harmed lately and throughout this entire experience. So I love that so much. To whoever's listening to this, they're probably thinking, yeah, I've been asked a few times to either tone myself down, or I've been conditionally empowered, or I feel like the table is so far out of reach and maybe it's not a goal for me anymore. Maybe it's not something I want to do anymore. To those people who may have those thoughts ruminating in their mind right now after listening to everything you have shared today, what would be the top 3 tips you would share with them about moving forward with these thoughts?
Yes. I think the first thing that's coming up for me when you ask that question is around agency, because what I've realized the most impactful thing is oftentimes in those spaces, as you were saying, like when people are told to tone down or suppress themselves, what's happening is we feel a sense of power being taken away. And that powerlessness to me actually is like, I say it's an illusion. It's not to discount what people are experiencing, but it's more that like I feel like people still have agency. And I don't say that lightly because I know every action has consequences, but it's like to me, I still continue to remind myself that you have agency because there are consequences of not speaking up to and internalizing that. But I feel like we don't always talk about those either. So I think the first thing I'll say is agency. Um, the second thing that's coming up for me is just thinking about like what it even means. Like we've talked about this throughout today's episode, is like what it means to bring your full self. And I think a lot of people, like I've experienced this where sometimes people tell me like, oh, you show up so authentically, and that's what they're saying. But sometimes I'm just like, I feel like a fraud because of that. Because I'm like, I still have so much work to do and I'm still working on myself. That sometimes very like off-putting, even though people are very well-meaning and intentioned when they say that. So I think one thing I'll say for me, that's a constant journey of becoming yourself. And that um, I usually say like becoming is a state of being and being is an emergent state of becoming. And that's just to say like I'm constantly becoming myself and who I want to be. It's not like a destination, but it's more like the process and the journey. Um, and the last thing I'll say is in those spaces is we don't always have to put ourselves in harmful situations. And what I mean by that is I've always felt the urge and the need to respond to harm and like start things like in response to something being caused. So what I've been to your point about the table is going back to that and tying it together is just like I've come to realize that most of the work that I do now is actually away from the table, where it's like, why can't I build? Why can't I create outside of these systems? And recognizing that like it's not like a binary where you're like outside or inside the system now, you're still in relationship with the system. But I think again, like how I choose to be in relationship with the system is um I think the third thing that I will say that's really helped me think through even saying like I don't want to seat at the table because I don't want to constantly be reactionary in how I choose to create spaces for myself. I want to be more intentional and proactive about that.
I love these. I love the point about the illusion so much because we talked about a lot of lies that we've been told. Like the table in general is a lie for people who are not white men. Like, even if I get to the table, I'm not going to be able to not pretend to be a white man. Um, So I love that, because an illusion is a lie. But I also love that you talked about your relationship with the table. So many of us, or so many of the people that are going to listen to this, are going to think about their relationship with the table. If they are already at the table, they'll be like, well, damn, how long have I been sitting at this table and nobody's asked me like what I want for an appetizer? Nobody's asked me shit. And if they're not at the table yet, like how long they've been standing in the doorway with their foot in the door, like with the promise, somebody whispering to them, like, yeah, hell yeah, you the next person at the table, which is a fucking lie. So many people are going to sit down and think about where they're at in relationship with the table, and how much that relationship is either harming them, or like they weren't a parent of, I guess. Sorry, this is like blowing my mouth. Just blow. And I hope that they're able to sit down and really write down where they're at, and if they want to be in relationship with the table and marriage. So thank you so much, Mad, for just breaking that down. And oh my God, let me stop, because this, like, thank you so much for that. Do you have any last minute sprinkles for the audience?
I don't think so, but definitely would, if anyone wants to get in touch, I'm primarily on LinkedIn, so you can find me first and last name, sahibzada Mayed, and yeah, if you can also send me an email if that's helpful. So that would be mayed@sahibzadamayed.com. And yeah, hopefully this is engaging for people to listen to and reflect on.
I believe it will be. And their information will be in the show notes when this episode is published. Man, thank you so much for everything you've shared today. I apologize for not being able to articulate as well, but I think there's still not a very big part of me. Okay, this is a big part of me who still thought about the table. And today I'm going to have to sit down after this and write down where we're at. Like, I don't think we ever broke up with the table. I don't think we ever sat down and broke up with the table. I still called him sometimes and text them. I didn't know that. So thank you so much for that. To anyone who's listening to this, keep setting those boundaries and saying absolutely not to anything unaligned. We will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.